Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes is a kickstarted spiritual successor to the fan favourite Suikoden series, and it's being developed by an all-star team that includes many developers who played pivotal roles in the creation of the Suikoden games. The name 100 Heroes is derived from the game's core gimmick of having over 100 recruitable party members, a claim to fame that it shares with the Suikoden games that inspired it. Suikoden is a beloved series, so needless to say, this announcement drummed up a lot of hype, and 100 Heroes quickly blazed past its goal on Kickstarter and has currently reached almost 10 times its original goal, which led to it blasting through all of its stretch goals, one of which was Eiyuden Chronicle Rising, an entirely standalone prequel game designed to introduce us to the world of Eiyuden Chronicle and whet the appetite of players before we get our hands on 100 Heroes in 2023. Unlike 100 Heroes, which is a strategy RPG like Suikoden, Eiyuden Chronicle Rising is a side-scrolling action RPG, and while its combat is very simplistic, and there are times where you can tell that it was made on a shoestring budget, there's an undeniable charm to Eiyuden Chronicle Rising that kept me invested the whole way through, and left me more excited than ever for 100 Heroes. Eiyuden Chronicle Rising follows CJ, a young scavenger who's been sent out from her village as part of a rite of passage that requires her to search the world for a great treasure. This quest leads CJ to a mining town called New Nevaeh, but once she arrives, CJ is informed that she needs an exorbitantly expensive license in order to hunt for treasure in their mines. So CJ cuts a deal with the acting mayor, Isha, agreeing to fill out a stamp card by helping the people of New Nevaeh with their errands in exchange for an explorer's license so she can finally set out on her quest for treasure. While Rising's story is very straightforward, its writing is surprisingly sharp and funny. Whoever was responsible for the localization has done a fantastic job of keeping the witty dialogue and fun banter between the party members intact. While simple, Eiyuden Chronicles Rising's combat is fun for the most part. Rising plays a bit like a beat-em-up, but adds a bit more depth by having you control a party of 3 characters, each with their own unique attacks and special ability. But unlike most action RPGs like the Tales and Ys games, in Eiyuden Chronicle Rising you'll be controlling all 3 party members simultaneously, with each of the party members having an ability equipped to one of the face buttons. This is a clever take on handling a party system that I don't think I've ever seen done before. The 3 party members in Rising are CJ, Garou, and Isha. CJ is the most agile member of the party. She fights with a pair of climbing axes, which also allow her to scale walls. She can double jump, and her unique ability lets her dash out of the way of incoming attacks. Garou is a giant one-eyed kangaroo warrior who fights with a massive buster sword like Guts from Berserk. Garou is the heavy-hitting brute of the party. He can clear paths by smashing boulders with his colossal blade, and he can also use it to block attacks and even parry enemy projectiles, sending them straight back at his opponents. And this motley crew is rounded out by Isha, who aside from being the acting mayor of New Nevaeh, is also a killer sorceress. Isha is the party's ranged attacker who flings spells from a distance and can knock flying enemies from the sky so that CJ and Garou can wail on them with melee attacks. Isha can also hover, which allows her to glide to ledges that Garou and CJ can't reach. I genuinely like all 3 party members. This eclectic crew has all the charisma of a classic JRPG party, and the endearing cast of characters largely carries the otherwise by the numbers story, with the endless back and forth bickering between CJ and Garou providing non-stop entertainment throughout the adventure. By attacking in quick succession with different party members, you can create combos known as link attacks, and this is the best way to deal real damage to strong enemies. By filling out subsequent stamp cards by completing different side missions, you'll unlock the ability to string more and more attacks together to perform longer and stronger link attacks. As you buy and upgrade weapons and armour, you'll unlock some new abilities like downward and upward attacks. Eventually, you'll even be able to equip the party with gear that adds different types of elemental damage to their attacks, which ups their damage output and lets them deal additional damage to enemies who are susceptible to that element, as well as smash through elemental barriers to unlock new areas of the map. Whenever you buy a new weapon, the weaponsmith will allow you to give it a name, which is a nice way of personalising your characters in a game that doesn't feature any real character customization. Rising's dungeons usually culminate in a major boss battle, and these fights are where I started to realise just how shallow Rising's combat is. Even when you crank the difficulty up, it's clear Eiyuden Chronicle Rising isn't a game that's setting out to challenge you. Most bosses blatantly telegraph their attacks, giving you plenty of time to move out of the way. And bosses have a shield that needs to be whittled down to expose their weak spot before you can actually deal damage to them, and while their weak spot would already be glaringly obvious, you don't even need to work out what their weak point is, as there will usually be a literal sign pointing at it saying weak once it's exposed, which does feel a little ridiculous. As simplistic as the combat mechanics are, they're largely sufficient for what Eiyuden Chronicle Rising sets out to be. And Rising definitely deserves props for its unique take on controlling an RPG party that keeps its relatively simplistic combat interesting for longer than you'd expect. However, the repetitive fights did start to wear thin in my last few hours with Eiyuden Chronicle Rising, and as I ticked off the remaining side quests for the Platinum, I was definitely ready to be done with the game. Aside from the core cast, the world design in Eiyuden Chronicle Rising was largely what kept me interested throughout my playthrough. As you start exploring Rising's various dungeons, you realise that this world has been built atop the ruins of some ancient, yet highly technologically advanced society, which is a theme that always intrigues me. I also grew to genuinely like the town of New Nevaeh, which is fortunate because you'll be heading back to New Nevaeh constantly to make use of the town's various facilities. New Nevaeh has such a cool, cozy vibe to it that perfectly showcases the charm of Eiyuden Chronicle Rising. As you progress through the story, new businesses open up around town, as CJ and crew help New Nevaeh evolve from a practically abandoned mining town to a bustling tourist destination. New Nevaeh is filled with locations that you'll want to visit between quests if you want your party to be at their best. There's the town tavern where you can bring cooking ingredients you find in the wild to have the tavern's proprietor Sarita whip you up a meal to refill your health and buff your stats. There's an armourer who can reinforce your party's gear to improve their defensive stats, an apothecary who'll let you craft or purchase medicinal potions, and a pawn shop where you can sell all the excess junk you've picked up in the world to make a quick buck and free up room in your inventory. And speaking of inventory, there's even a bag maker who can upgrade your storage, giving you more inventory slots. I would highly recommend maxing out your storage as soon as you can, because the meagre amount of storage you start the game with fills up incredibly quickly. So if you don't want to be sorting your inventory every 5 minutes, you'll want to acquire more space ASAP. But New Nevaeh's biggest draw for tourists is its hot springs. And by paying a visit to the town's inn, your party can take a dip in the hot springs to receive a range of helpful buffs like increased damage or XP gain for a day. When you venture outside of New Nevaeh, you'll find yourself exploring 5 or so major areas that all feel like they've been ripped straight from a classic JRPG. These locations are interconnected either by passageways or archstones that can instantly teleport you to a new location. And while Eiyuden Chronicle Rising doesn't have the largest variety of locations to showcase, meaning you'll end up revisiting each location countless times, the environments that are here are at least drastically varied. There's a lush green forest, a frigid snowy mountain range, a smouldering volcanic area, ominous ancient underground ruins, and of course the resource-rich quarry that New Nevaeh was known for, where you can find plenty of ores to upgrade your weapons and armour. When you're out and about adventuring, you can gather meat and fish by laying traps around the environment to catch wild animals, and by playing a rudimentary fishing minigame where you quickly press a series of buttons as they pop up on the screen to reel in a fish. With a game as simple as this, you've got to be careful not to overstay your welcome, and for me, the story of Eiyuden Chronicle Rising felt about right at 12 hours. Where the game starts to feel unnecessarily padded is when you start tackling the side missions. Rising has far too many side quests for its own good, especially because they're nearly all fetch quests. Basically every side mission just requires you to go gather supplies or an item for someone, or kill a specific number of enemies. The side missions are also exceptionally short, with the majority taking just a couple of minutes to finish. I just can't stand this scattershot approach to side missions. I'd much rather have 15 to 20 well thought out side missions than 100 that are purely filler. The first thing that drew me to Eiyuden Chronicle Rising was its art style. Rising's 2.5D visuals blend beautiful pixel art sprites with 3D environments that give the world a sense of depth. This effect is very reminiscent of the look of Square Enix's HD 2D games, Octopath Traveler, Triangle Strategy, and most recently, Live Alive. Though being a side project as part of a Kickstarter campaign, Rising obviously doesn't have the same level of production value and polish that those games have. Nevertheless, Rising's visuals are still eye-catching and remained a big part of the game's appeal to me throughout. Eiyuden Chronicle Rising's character design is also exceptional. Garou in particular is one of the coolest looking characters I've seen in a while. Though it's pretty easy to tell which characters are going to be returning in 100 Heroes by their appearance alone, when there's a bunch of generic looking villagers with a lizard person and a birdman among them. Being a Kickstarter stretch goal, it's clear Eiyuden Chronicle Rising was cooked up on a shoestring budget and in a relatively brief amount of time, and there are areas where this shows, from the limited amount of environments to the complete lack of voice acting and the repeated animation of a guy sawing and hammering materials every time a new building is constructed in town. And while the music in Eiyuden Chronicle Rising is excellent, there's a very limited selection of tracks, so you end up hearing the same songs over and over again. While Eiyuden Chronicle Rising would have benefited from a bit more time in the oven, so certain elements could be further fleshed out, it's still a charming little game with an endearing cast of characters and a unique take on an RPG party system. Playing through Rising gives me faith that its developers have the potential to deliver something truly great in the future, and most importantly, Eiyuden Chronicle Rising served its main purpose by getting me more excited than ever for 100 Heroes release next year. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, or leave a comment. You can find countless other videos on my channel, including my recent reviews of LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, Ghostwire Tokyo, and Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin. And be sure to stay tuned for my upcoming reviews of Kirby and the Forgotten Land, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, and Sonic Origins.